Challenging discussions with our partners are, well, they're challenging. What can we do to make them easier? Well, at least according to a relatively recent study, just by adding an I statement, a self-perspective piece, and an other perspective piece, we reduce the likelihood of a predicted defensive response from our listener. As an example, I think you should help with the cleaning is an I statement piece. I feel it is unfair that I have to do all of the cleaning by myself. That's a self-perspective piece. And finally, Lucy, I understand that you are very tired after work. That's an other perspective piece. In Rogers et al. 2018, researchers explored different formulations of the same statements to see the impact on triggering a defensive reaction in the listener. That study involved 253 university students with a mean age of 28, and 77% of them were female. The study used hypothetical conflict scenarios. That's fictional disputes between two people, one being the offending party, the other being the offended party, which the subjects would read. The subjects were given 8 statements that the fictional offended party could use to start a discussion regarding the offending behavior, after having read a conflict scenario. For each of the 8 statements, the study's subjects then recorded what they thought was the chance that the offending party would have a defensive reaction in response, on a gradated scale of from extremely unlikely to extremely likely. From that, an average was taken from the subject's response from the scenarios to determine the score of each statement. Okay. The 8 different statements were broken down into either having I statements or you statements and different perspectives. That is, 4 statements had I statements, 4 had you statements, and the different variations of no perspective, self-perspective, and other perspective were included, totaling 8 statements. All right, that's a lot of background, but here's what the researchers found. Just by including I statements, there was a lower chance of expecting a defensive reaction relative to the alternative you statements. Remember, we're looking for ways to have a lower odds of a defensive reaction from the listener. Here's an example. Lucy, you should help with the cleaning. That's a you statement. Compare that to Lucy, I think you should help with the cleaning. That's an I statement. And if anyone looks up the study, you can take a look at that at page 5. Notice the I in the I statement. But they found more. Quote, the benefit of I language compared to you language was larger for statements that communicated one or more perspectives, end quote at page 7. And the best result occurred when using an I statement and including a self-perspective and including another perspective. Well, what would that look like? Well, for example, quote, Lucy, I understand that you are very tired after work, but I feel it is unfair that I have to do all the cleaning by myself, and I think you should help with the cleaning, end quote, page 5 from the study. Well, what does this mean in practice? The researchers concluded that it means that we might expect a lower chance of getting a defensive response if we use I statements and both perspectives when we start a conflict discussion. By comparison, among the statements studied in this study, the worst formulation, that's the one most likely to have a predicted defensive response, the kind of response we don't want to get, would be a you statement with no perspective. What does that look like? For example, quote, Lucy, you should help with the cleaning. And that's at page 5. There was no perspective in that statement. It's just a straight up you statement. If all that feels pretty confusing, let's analyze the best type of statement into its different components. So for example, quote, Lucy, I understand that you are very tired after work, but I feel it is unfair that I have to do all the cleaning by myself, and I think you should help with the cleaning. That's at page 5 of the study. So what does this mean for us in practice? According to this study, if we want the full benefit in our first statement in what could be a conflictual discussion, we've got to include those 3 pieces. our I statement, our self perspective, and the other perspective. When we do that, at least according to this study, we reduce our odds of a predicted defensive response from our listener.